Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
The Victorian era was a time of contrarian ideals. They covered themselves completely but fetishized the female figure, they were obsessed with cleanliness but practically lived in a sewer, and they prized marriage and family above all things but sold their wives at auction. It's possible that the Victorians couldn't see the forest for the trees, but maybe they were just a generation full of weirdos. Modesty panels. Victorians liked their women modest, or maybe they were so sex-obsessed that any exposed flesh would drive them insane. Either way, one way the people of Victorian England kept their gals as pure as the driven snow was with a modesty panel, a simple slab of wood nailed or propped up close to a desk or other structure that revealed a woman's ankles and kept adventurous creeps from looking up their skirts. Beefy skin. Victorian ladies and even skincare-minded gentlemen kept their faces pillowy soft with face masks, but not the mud and seaweed treatments of today. Victorians used raw beef or veal to stamp out acne, rosacea, and dry skin. Dining in the dark. How do you properly digest your food? Do you chew it up until it's reached the appropriate texture to easily swallow? Do you make sure to get enough roughage? How about eating in the dark? Victorians believed that digestion could best be achieved by sitting in the dark, so they built their dining rooms in the basement, the perfect place for a blind dinner. Arsenic for all. Victorians were just as obsessed with their bodies as we are, if not more dangerously. Many women used arsenic, the carcinogenic poison, to fight wrinkles, and men swallowed arsenic tablets as a kind of pre-Pfizer Viagra. It's unclear if arsenic can actually be used to turn compasses to true north, but it doesn't seem advisable to try it. Wasp waists. We all know that corsets were a thing in the Victorian era, but they were much more extreme than most people think. Many women cinched themselves down until they had tiny wasp waists with super snug corsets that didn't just rearrange your insides, they made it impossible to breathe. Grave robbing. One of the most lucrative side hustles of the Victorian era was grave robbing, and the fresher the corpse, the better. Medical students needed cadavers to study, so a black market of corpses arose, enriching adventurous thieves and angering families of the dearly departed. Put a bird on it. Victorians loved nature, so feathered hats and dresses were all the rage. Some of the more adventurous ladies even attached entire bird corpses to their outfits. It was such a popular trend that it almost sent 67 species of bird to the extinction list. The mummy craze. The 19th century was a fertile age of exploration, and one of the most impressive discoveries were ancient mummies that the people of Victorian England brought home from Egyptian vacations. They invited all their friends over for unwrapping parties, which tended to be rather grim spectacles that nevertheless delighted the morbid weirdos. At one notable gathering for the unwrapping of Neskens, the second wife of Theban high priest Penogem II was placed in a contraption that made her appear to dance. The demand for mummies to take home was so high that Egyptians started transporting them from less visited ruins to areas that got more traffic. Victorian garden hermits. The next time someone shows off their garden to you, make sure to ask where they keep their hermit. In the Victorian era, wealthy families hired people to don full hermit garb, complete with robes, long hair, beards, and hermit glasses, and act as ornamental garden hermits on their land. The biggest rule of all? No speaking to anyone on the property. Ah, the joys of wealth. Entomological accessories. Not only did Victorian women want to look like wasps, they wanted to decorate their bodies with insects. They wore live beetles as jewelry and attached dead butterflies to their gowns, pushing many insects to the brink of extinction. Ring my bell. In an era when death was at the forefront of everyday life, Victorians were spooked about the possibility of being buried alive. To make sure no one was interred before their time, Victorians designed safety coffins outfitted with bells the non-deceased could ring in the case of accidental burial. This often resulted in false alarm, as corpses swelled from decomposition could trigger the bells. Take my wife, please. Attaining a divorce in the early 1900s was an expensive undertaking, so those who couldn't afford the legal fees sometimes sold their wives to the highest bidder. It was often done with the full consent of the wife, who was usually bought by her family or a new lover. Railroad psychosis. Railroads were an innovation that changed travel, business, and apparently, the mental health field. Most Victorians were in favor of a more industrious future, but some worried that darting across the country at high speeds could turn a person mad. The era was littered with stories of men losing their minds thanks to the sounds and motions of trains, fights breaking out, and institutionalized patients hopping trains to freedom and even more madness. Wear black. If you've checked out a photo from the Victorian era recently, you've no doubt noticed that the people of the day wore a lot of black. They may have been obsessed with death and sex, but they weren't proto-goths, they just didn't want to wash their clothes. At the time, London was plagued with pollution from the coal industry, meaning that anyone wearing white would soon be wearing grey after a short walk in the sooty air. Wearing darker clothing meant that no one noticed how dirty you were. Visiting hours. Today, the standard would. Text is the only requirement to arrange an impromptu hangout, but that wasn't the case for Victorians. Ladies were expected to be ready to host visitors from 3 to 6 in the afternoon, with any time after reserved for very close friends and relatives, and anyone else who showed up outside those times was considered a serious jerk. Flaming fashion. Between 1850 and 1870, women layered several intricate skirts over a wooden hoop in what was known as the crinoline period, but those who took part in the trend did so at their own risk. The wide outfits kept the wearer from walking through doors, and the dresses frequently caught on fire when the wearers inevitably brushed up against a candle. Victoria's curry. The Queen Victorian herself took that Victorian hospitality to a whole new level. She ordered her cooks to prepare curry every day, even though she hated all spicy foods. Why? In case a visiting Oriental stopped by. Such benevolence. Honey toothpaste. Health-conscious Victorians made sure to take care of their teeth with a mixture of charcoal and honey. Charcoal is believed to have some whitening abilities, but honey just rots your teeth, so it's doubtful those misguided Victorians saw any beneficial dental effects. Victorian body modification. Despite their prim reputation, the Victorians were one of the first generations of Westerners to embrace tattoos and piercings. Many women got their nipples pierced, mostly likely because they enjoyed the way it felt, and people from all walks of Victorian life got inked with the initials of their loved ones or nautical symbols. Shock treatment. In the 19th century, Victorians thought electrotherapy could fix everything from gout to muscle problems. All you had to do was pay your local electrotherapist, who shocked the problem area, but all it did was leave many people with unsightly scars. Deadly food. During the 19th century, it wasn't out of the ordinary to use chalk or alum as an additive in dough to make bread whiter. Some bakers even used clay, plaster of Paris, or sawdust to fill out their recipes. Meanwhile, strychnine made its way into beer, and pretty much everything contained some degree of lead. Copper sulfates bolstered fruit, jam, and wine. Mercury was a regular ingredient in candy, and many ice cream vendors in London used water and chalk in their sweet desserts. How did anyone survive? Bathing machines. For as long as humans have been living on land, we've loved going to the beach. In the Victorian era, the demands of modesty on women were so great that they rented bathing machines, which looked like covered wagons that drove them into the water, just to relax in the placid English waves without anyone seeing them in their bathing suits. 4-penny coffins. If you were living on the street and needed a safe place to sleep, you could rent a coffin-shaped bed for just 4 pennies from the Salvation Army for the evening. The beds weren't comfortable, and they were definitely coffins, but they kept you alive for another day, so that's something. Victorians Morning. They take mourning seriously. Women often wore mourning rings, which were usually made from onyx or jet and featured hair from the deceased person. Some would even bottle their mourning tears. Often, women were hired to stand at a bachelor's grave site, usually blonde, to cry inconsolably so that he seemed adored. Surgery. In a time when 1 in 4 surgery patients died after surgery, you were very lucky in Victorian times to have a good doctor with a clean theatre. There was no anesthesia, no painkillers for after, and no electric equipment to reduce the duration of an operation. Victorian surgery wasn't just creepy, it was outright horrific. Gothic Novel. How could the Gothic novel, a genre of literature that combines elements of both horror and romance, not be included on a list like this? It was the Victorian period that gave us such great works of terror as Dracula, and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Even the Americans got in on the act with Edgar Allan Poe producing some of the greatest Gothic literature of the time. The Victorians knew how to frighten people, and they knew how to do it in grand style. These works still form the basis of much modern horror, and their power to thrill has not dwindled in the least. Women's underwear was crotchless. No, really. The base layer of any woman's outfit was a pair of long bloomers like the ones above. But these bloomers were designed only to cover each leg, not the unmentionables. This was to allow women to use the toilet more easily, and also because dresses were so heavy and comprised of several layers, which kept everything hidden. TLDR, Victorian vaginas had a direct line of sight to the floor.
Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.